Well, hello again, Tucson. Welcome to This Week in Mediocrity, where we present you with all the best and the worst of the media. I'm your host, Joel Foster, and is it me or is it hot in here? My, how the weeks fly in Trump's America. This week began so lighthearted, like a romantic comedy where a simpleton elderly man accidentally becomes president. We laughed as if we had no idea that our hopes for the future would get pummeled into hamburger meat just the next day. In case you didn't go on the internet this week or didn't talk to anyone and you're watching the show for some reason, we got another classic tweet from the commander-in-chief this week where he said, quote, "Despite the constant negative press confifi," and then left it to us to make sense of it. Trump then sent a follow-up tweet that said, "I can't believe all this fake," appearing to fall asleep mid-tweet. We all had some good laughs, and he almost seemed like a real human being for 6 whole hours. Then, maybe because he wanted to get back at us for laughing at him, Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which aims to cut global emissions starting in 2020 so that temperatures won't rise above 2 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. This is the level that scientists say that it's too late to turn back. But we're kind of already there, aren't we? So here we go. 195 countries signed on to the agreement, including China, Russia, even North Korea signed on. We now join only Syria and Nicaragua as the only 2 countries not part of the agreement. And you might say, well, Syria's no good, but Nicaragua's all right. My cousin went on vacation there. Well, they decided not to sign because the agreement didn't go far enough in battling climate change. So why did Trump pull out of an agreement that seemingly has such widespread support? Well, as usual, it seems mostly because Fox News wanted him to. And Fox isn't just some Johnny-come-lately, no. When it comes to the Paris Agreement, they're a regular OG premature ejaculator. Here's conservative cable news personality and Lord of the Undead, Charles Krauthammer, talking about the reason why President Obama wanted in on the agreement in the first place. Let's take a
way to distract and
okay, but he's always been heavily invested in climate change, always. This is an issue that's, I believe, more important to him than defeating ISIS. It's more important than keeping Ukraine out of the Russian orbit. You know, I want a clean planet. I'm sure you do too. But he's almost obsessed with this issue, and I want to know why.
Well, here you, once again, you're
psychiatrist.
Yes, exactly. All right. So since I played it in the previous little segment, I guess I'm required to play it here. All right. I'll give you one hypothesis, which is the best I can do. He sees himself grandiosely, as he always has, as a kind of a visionary, a man who sees so much further ahead than the ordinary plebeians who inhabit the United States, that he's now looking generations ahead. He's saving the planet. He knows that there is no honor to prophets in their own time, but he will be honored for having seen so far. So whereas you and I and the little people with the blinkered vision are concerned about real problems, terrorism, the threat of nuclear Iran, the Russians on the march, the collapse of world order, particularly in the Middle East, with the retreat of, whereas we're concerned with all this, he can see so much farther. These problems, in his view, will work themselves out.
But this is a bad deal. You know, Herman Munster is right. The nerve of this guy wanting to save the world. Who does he think he is, President of the United States? We all know presidents don't save the world. They send nonsense tweets while trying to knock loose that last dingleberry. So if Krauthammer is right, then Obama did it all for the ego. Well, thank goodness we no longer have a president with a huge ego, am I right? So is that the only reason why they're against the climate agreement? Because Obama likes it? Hello? Well, let's be fair. It's not just Obama. Fox actually went the Clinton route, oddly enough. Remember when Bill Clinton said, "It's the economy, stupid"? Well, now Fox News is literally saying, "It's the economy, stupid," to its viewers, because that's the type of information that they're puking out to their audience every night. The main argument from Fox, it comes down to that the Paris Agreement would hollow out our economy, would destroy our economy. Why? Because coal miners. Forget that coal mining has been decreasing for decades and that there are now twice as many people working in the solar industry, but solar panel installers don't get to wear those cool hats. And Trump really likes wearing hats. Moving on, Utah Senator Mike Lee has been one of the loudest voices in Congress arguing against the Paris Agreement. Lee is a former clerk for Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito and has never met a law that he liked. Among the things that Lee thinks are unconstitutional are the 14th and 17th Amendments, Medicare and Medicaid, the Violence Against Women Act, child labor laws, the FDA, and I'm assuming low hairlines. Here's Lee explaining his views on why the climate agreement is a bad deal for America.
Look, this is a bad deal. It's a bad deal for the United States. It might be a good deal if you want to slow economic growth in America. It might be a good deal for those who don't want jobs for middle-class Americans. But it's a terrible deal for the American people themselves. Look, climates change. It's what they do. It's what happens. Nothing that the government does is going to make that better. And if we try to change that through immense federal regulation brought about by an international agreement, we're only going to hurt America's poor and middle class.
So the argument that we had on our program by Joe Trippi is the president should try to fix the agreement, fix how we fulfill our promise, because if the United States pulls out, then it reflects our lack of leadership or desire to lead in the world on this particular issue. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, first of all, on this particular issue, that begs the question, is this the particular issue? Really? Is this the issue that we ought to put all of our cards into? Is this where we ought to put all of our emphasis? When we've got an American middle class that is struggling under $2 trillion of regulatory compliance costs every single year, is this really what we want to be doing? I don't think so.
So that's one of the questions. One of the other points that you were making, I saw in your statement that you put out, was that you did not like that President Obama went around Congress. And that has to do a little bit with your book, and you were looking at some of the founding fathers, the unknown founding fathers of America. So I'd like you to bring that together if you could for us.
Sure.
What bothered you about the process, and how do you think it ties into the way our government should function?
It bothered me that President Obama negotiated this and got the United States into it without consulting Congress, without even attempting to submit it to the Senate for ratification. Look, there are all kinds of checks and balances that have been...
We're going to take a look at the numbers.
So we got the economic impacts in there, he got that in. But Lee's also bothered that Obama didn't consult Congress over the deal. He wants to be part of it, which makes sense. It looks like Lee wanted to be in on the discussion. But it's funny because Mike Lee has the 9th highest number of missed votes in the Senate. So it seems that Lee wants the opportunity to vote, he just doesn't want to actually show up to vote. I guess it's good to have options, so can't blame the guy. But do these guys actually have a point? Would the Paris Agreement destroy our economy? Breitbart says that it will cost the economy 1.1 million jobs in the industrial sector and would hollow out states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio, states that all went for Trump, albeit slightly in the last election. But Breitbart ignores the growth of the green economy and what impact the agreement would have on spurring these industries, such as solar, wind, and so on. And we would assume that if there were job increases in the alternative energy industry, the ones who would get the jobs would be blue-collar workers in these states, right? It's odd that we hear the argument that government can't legislate itself out of the crisis, because at the same time, they're advocating for the government to force coal mines to stay in business, even though the industry is clearly dying. Hypocrisy? Probably, but who cares anymore? We'll have another scandal next week that will distract us anyway, so look forward to that. But at least the economic argument makes some sense, at least in theory. Our good friends at InfoWars make Charles Krauthammer and Mike Lee look like Socrates in comparison. Here's their version of why the globalists want the climate agreement ratified. And I have to admit, it makes a way better movie than Mike Lee's version. Let's take a look.
We're going to take a look at the numbers. They're talking about containing climate temperatures, an increase within 2 degrees. And of course, our longer term goal is to keep that down to 1.5 degrees. They're going to go down eventually to 0 carbon. So we'll take a look at these numbers. But you know what this really is, Leanne? This is really economic death by degrees. Seriously, because what they're doing with this, and what we're going to talk about in just a moment, the French elections, these are all efforts at taking down economies, taking down national sovereignty, creating chaos so that they can offer you the solution of a more centralized government as an intermediate step to a world government. But let's take a quick look at the climate agreement, what it is and what it isn't. First of all,
Obviously. What a great segue by the guy, too. He's like, they're going to enslave the human race and turn us into batteries. Let's look at the agreement, shall we? Say what you will about Alex Jones and his crew, but they have the imagination of a child. And it's kind of beautiful in a sense, isn't it? But don't worry about the impending collapse, because Alex Jones has the solution. And it's only $19.99. Let's take a look at what preceded that segment.
Elite of the elite. Thousands of years ago, up in the Himalayan mountains and in Tibet.
And we wanted to put this in stuff for a couple years, but we couldn't get an organic form.
Right. I mean,
so let's explain. I mean, this stuff's so good, we couldn't put it out for years.
Right. So I had to actually, it's kind of like the iodine crystals, finding a source deep in the earth that we could get the cleanest source available. But in Tibet and in Nepal and in the Himalayan mountains, thousands of years ago, they watched these monkeys, and during the summer months, the monkeys would go up into the mountains.
Now you're being racist against monkeys.
And they would pick this black substance from the mountains. And so in Russia, they actually, it grows in Russia in the mountains and in the Himalayas and only in the summer. And shilajit is actually the decomposition of up to 7,000 different medicinal herbs. So it decomposes, all these different herbs decompose in the Himalayan mountains and the volcanic soil up there. And what happens in the summertime...
So it's almost like an oil from...
Yes, it's high in fulvic acid, it's high in humic acid.
Because they're always claiming oil is really from decomposed animals and plants. There is some oil that is based from fossils, but most of it's really abiotic. But so this is a true fossil source? I mean, explain it to me.
It is, it's really the decomposition, like I said, of over 7,000 different medicinal herbs and plants. And with the rocks and the pressure deep in the mountains, it freezes and during the summertime and the pressures build it up.
It oozes out.
It oozes out. So it literally oozes out of the mountain.
It's like rock sap.
It's like rock sap. It's black, and it's highly nutritious. Even in the 1980s, when the Olympic athletes in Russia were accused of being on steroids, they found out that they were actually been given shilajit because it works as an anabolic as well, and it builds muscles. It's a big dose in there.
All right, far out, man. I guess the key takeaway from there is to follow the monkeys. But that's a hell of an endorsement, right? The Russians use this stuff to cheat in the Olympics. I want some. All right, I've got one more from Fox, this time from The Five with Greg Gutfeld, who's pretty much like the stoner uncle who wears a tattered Motley Crue jacket in the Fox family. But his show takes a different tack to arguing why the agreement won't work. And the reason is surprisingly emo. Let's listen.
Well, I think that the president tomorrow, he says he's going to announce this at 3 o'clock in the Rose Garden, bold venue for something like this. I think that he can explain it either way. If he says he's going to stay, it doesn't matter because it doesn't really have any teeth in it, and he can say that this is important for diplomacy. If he decides to leave, he can say it doesn't matter. Either way, I think that it doesn't matter.
Jesse, what do you think he's going to do?
He ran on America first, not Paris first. I think he pulls out. It's worthless like a piece of paper. I actually read what it said. Listen to this.
Yep.
It sets goals for reducing emissions, and then every year they meet at a fancy place.
That's all it's about.
And they talk about whether or not they've met those goals.
This is why President Obama didn't deserve all of that adulation and praise at the time.
And it's non-binding, and there's no penalties for not reaching the goals, and you can pull out of it, and there's no penalties for that either. So the whole thing's worthless, and even...
Yes. Doesn't matter, man. Don't worry about it. Nothing matters. First off, can we talk about the Paris thing first? Trump echoed the same statement yesterday that he campaigned for Pittsburgh, not Paris. Do they realize the Paris Agreement doesn't actually help people from Paris? It's not like we're agreeing to buy 200 tons of macarons or that Hollywood is going to start making movies about a widow finding herself in the countryside. It's called the Paris Agreement because it was signed in Paris. That's it. Maybe if we change the name to Donald Trump's greatest climate deal ever, then the president would be on board. But to go back to the other point that it doesn't matter, if it doesn't matter, then why even bother getting out of it? Most of the world is going to hate us now. That seems like a bad move to take the world off its axis for something that doesn't matter. It's all meaningless. But they do kind of have a point. Kind of, but not really at all. If we do invest massive resources to fight climate change, then we find out climate change doesn't turn out to be real, then it doesn't matter. Because we're going to have this whole industry to be leaders in tomorrow. So let me explain. To really understand the issue, let's look at another tool that dominated the world over the past 20 years. The internet. The reason why we have the Banana Sprite Challenge, Chocolate Rain, and 2 Girls in a Cup. People were scared or skeptical of the internet when it first came around, but we eventually all submitted to the allure of angrily arguing with someone at 2 a.m. about the last episode of Game of Thrones, and it took over our lives ever since. And just like climate change, conspiracy theorists thought that the internet would allow a global takeover. Then they wrote about it on the internet. We didn't reject the internet, even though it does kind of allow a small group of people to run the planet, like this guy and this guy. Our privacy is gone, but we don't care because the internet is awesome. The worst thing that could happen with a plan like the Paris Agreement is that we end up developing a new kind of energy, which is a new kind of industry, something we can lead the world in that would create jobs, and the kind of blue-collar jobs that middle America is losing. We need solar panel installers and electricians to make this stuff work. These are the kinds of jobs that people in Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania would love to have, and they already have the skills for. The irony is that by pulling out of the Paris Agreement, Trump is making it less likely that these rural communities are ever going to bounce back. Because there's only a finite amount of resources in the ground, right? So conceivably, it has to end at some point. We even saw this week that ExxonMobil supports the Paris Agreement. Yes, that ExxonMobil, the one that treated our Earth like a cheap prostitute for the past century. So what do we do at this point? The decision's already been made. So I guess all we can do is watch it crash. But maybe wait, I know what we can do. I need you to close your eyes. Close your eyes and say, this isn't real. This isn't real. Are you doing it? Close your eyes. Do it. Come on, harder. I wish. This isn't real. This isn't real.
And before I introduce our 5 on 20 Tuesday night news team, I'd like to do one historic thing. Here we are on Channel 20, brought to you by the Creative Tucson Network. And I'd like to be the first network in the nation to call the 2016 presidential election. Yes, all our exit polls confirm, and it's undeniable, Hillary Clinton will be the next president of the United States. Cue the balloons.
It worked! It worked! All right, stay cool, Tucson. I'll see you next week. Have a great weekend. It worked!